Thank you for joining this discussion about strategies to support student belonging and learning capacities in post-secondary education with a focus on STEM fields. My name is Rebecca Griffiths, and I'm a researcher at SRI International, which is a nonprofit research institute. I'm joined by Kevin Binning and Eric McChesney at the University of Pittsburgh, my colleague Crystal Thomas from SRI, and our partner Sue Bickerstaff from Columbia College Research Center. So we're going to tell you about several studies we have underway on teaching strategies to support student success. But first, I'd like to provide a little bit of framing. Students pursuing degrees in STEM fields must contend with a number of challenges that have been well documented in various reports from the National Academies and the President's Council of Advisors on STEM and Technology, among many other sources. These challenges are particularly acute for students from historically marginalized groups, resulting in lower completion rates for Black and Latina students, even when controlling for prior academic preparation, according to a recent study by Hatfield, Brown, and Topaz. Some of these factors are probably well known. Student STEM department cultures have been characterized as unwelcoming to female and minoritized students. Some are characterized by individualistic sink or swim cultures that weed students out rather than seeking to build on their strengths. The content intensiveness of gateway courses leaves less space for instructors to focus on classroom culture and pedagogy or to draw connections between course content and real-world applications. Students from marginalized backgrounds may question whether they belong in college STEM courses, and research has found that their performance can be negatively impacted by fears of being stereotyped. The growth of online options has increased access to college education for students who juggle work and personal responsibilities, but they can exacerbate feelings of isolation. And we know that students arrive at college with having had widely varying opportunities to develop this mindset and skills needed to manage learning independently and to overcome these various obstacles. It is thus incumbent on institutions and faculty to improve the ways in which they support diverse students in STEM degree programs. Professional associations and scholars have pursued a number of avenues to lower barriers to student success in STEM, from departmental culture to mentorship to encouraging use of instructional practices designed to elicit active learning. We are especially interested in teaching and learning practices that support students' mindsets and skills to manage their learning process. For example, research supports interventions to increase students' sense of belonging and growth mindset. Studies that we have located mostly test these kinds of interventions outside of class settings, for example, as part of orientation courses delivered through student success units. Those studies fit with what we have observed on campus, which is that support for students' mindsets and skills to manage their learning tend to be offered by advising or student success units and are disconnected from academic programming. So the presenters today are going to share two projects that hypothesized and are testing benefits to embedding supports in classroom experiences. One of these projects focused on belonging, specifically on belonging, and uses a field experimental methodology. Kevin and Eric are going to tell you what that looks like. The other addresses belonging as part of a suite of mindsets and skills that students use to manage their learning, and which can be activated or undermined by classroom environment. Crystal, Sue, and I are going to share the approaches that we're taking for this effort in the Post-Secondary Teaching with Technology Collaborative to develop and test instructional strategies that will ultimately become components of a comprehensive instructional model that will be designed for use in post-secondary online STEM courses. So with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Kevin and Eric.
Eric McChesney and Kevin Binning. My name is Eric McChesney. I'm here with my associate, Dr. Kevin Binning, from the You Belong Collaborative. We are a study group that looks at how to close undergraduate performance gaps at scale. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be talking about today. So first, we're going to be discussing some of the factors that underlie systematic underperformance and the extent of it in STEM fields and other large lecture contexts. We're going to be going over the research questions that specifically drive our inquiries, the theories that we're using to address those research questions. Then we're going to give you a quick rundown of the psychosocial intervention that we are trying, and let you sort of see what that's like, how it intervenes on students, mindsets, and other sorts of abilities. We're going to be briefly then discussing the methodology that we use to detect whether or not that intervention has been successful and to what extent, for whom, for what duration, etc. We're going to be presenting a little bit of our preliminary results and then discussing our current directions in research. So as many of you are likely aware, there are enormous systematic opportunity gaps that are based upon various socialization patterns, past experiences, and that eventually become performance gaps when one goes into college. These are usually stratified along the lines of race, gender, and class, and they exist over and above college readiness factors. In other words, a particular group might perform worse than would be expected given their pre-college academic preparation and other sort of factors. We can see examples of this in, for example, the completion rates. So the six-year completion rate for white students nationwide is 66%. For Latinx students, it's 67%. Black students, 42%. For women, you can also see that it is 63%, and for men, 57%. So these collective factors and their outcomes suggest that college environments are playing a pretty significant role in reducing the performance of certain demographic groups along these lines, which again lead to performance gaps, attrition, and the like. So prior research has significantly pointed to the role of growth mindsets, as well as the use of inclusive pedagogy and what sort of social norms exist in particular classroom environments, especially norms that exist around belonging, in influencing the size of these performance gaps. These beliefs are fortunately influenceable. We can intervene on them using things like faculty training and the psychosocial interventions that we and others have developed on mindset and belonging. Unfortunately, the interventions are not always robust across contexts. Sometimes they will work only in the context in which they are first developed and tested, and require a significant amount of work in order to transfer to another field, to another discipline, to another institution, or something of that sort. So what's really needed is a robust, adaptable, effective, and importantly, low-cost intervention that can then be scaled and taken up at various institutions and across various contexts. So that's what the You Belong Collaborative tries to do. We are currently attempting to develop a generalizable approach that removes barriers to belonging in the classroom. We want to find ways of establishing social norms inside of each classroom that adversity in the course is normal and surmountable, that students can and should reach out for help and shouldn't give in to those impulses towards guilt or shame or avoidance that might prevent them from doing so, and again, artificially degrade their performance, and to find ways of reminding them that they can still belong, even if they stumble, to try and sort of counteract a lot of those imposter syndrome effects and counteract a lot of those perfectionist tendencies that tend to make people not reach out for help and to not feel senses of belonging and not allow themselves to be vulnerable and develop those sort of cohesive relationships with others that are useful for performance and persistence. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to my colleague, Dr. Kevin Binning.
Thanks, Eric. So we term our approach an ecological belonging approach. And so I just want to quickly unpack what do we mean by this? What is ecological versus compared to what? So just to use a quick dictionary definition, ecological, of course, relates to or is concerned with the relation of living organisms to one another and to their physical surroundings. I want to contrast this with what you might call a psychological approach, where the focus is on the individual, with them changing individual minds, individual perceptions. Here, we're doing that, but we're also targeting the social norms and the intersubjective perceptions that guide people's experiences. Why do we do this? Why are we focusing on the room, trying to change the room? A lot of this, the motivation for our approach comes from Claude Steele's work on stereotype threat. The notion that stereotypes are in the air, they're in the room. I may not personally endorse a stereotype, you may not either, but we both are aware that they exist. And this awareness that I might be judged in light of a negative stereotype, let's say if I'm a woman in engineering context or Latinx in a STEM field, that I know there are negative stereotypes in the air about my group. And that concern can hinder my performance. It eats up working memory. Claude Steele talks about stereotype threat, this concern that others are going to judge me in light of my group identities, judge me negatively in light of my group identities, is like a distracting alarm that's going off while you're trying to do difficult cognitive tasks. So this hinders performance. What's lesser known about this, and which relates to our approach in the ecological domain, is that research also suggests that working with folks who are under stereotype threat also harms the performance of non-stereotyped individuals. This is not just a thing that's a problem for people who are stereotyped. This is a collective issue. And that's why we target our intervention at the collective level, at the classroom level. So just to situate this approach in the literature, we do build on prior social belonging interventions. We would call our ecological approach, our ecological belonging intervention, is a type of social belonging intervention, which is work that is pioneered by Greg Walton, Jeff Cohen, David Yeager, Shannon Brady, Christine Logo, and a variety of other folks. What the main message of social belonging interventions are, including ours, is that adversity is normal and temporary. It's not unique to me and stable, okay? So it's not the case that if I'm struggling, that this is an indicator. Let's say I'm a woman in an engineering context, that the reason I'm struggling isn't because I'm a woman. It's because this is hard, and pretty much everyone struggles at some point. Maybe not on every domain that I'm struggling on, but struggle is universal. Okay? It isn't about you or your group, and not only that, it's temporary. It's surmountable. You can get through it. We can help you get through it. You can search for help and receive it and get through this adversity. This work has shown pretty impressive effects, effects that have boosted not only grades, not only college retention and full-time enrollment, but even years after the intervention was delivered. This is a paper that came out in a few years ago with Shannon Brady, that this work continued to benefit, the intervention continued to benefit students even after college when they went to the workforce. The key difference here, of course, is that we are targeting our approach within the classroom, not bringing students to the lab, not delivering the intervention online, but embedding it, involving group discussion, involving instructors, making students interact as part of the intervention protocol, which we'll explain in more detail in a second. So just to go quickly over some of the theory here, as I mentioned, social belonging interventions are typically delivered in a lab setting, and their goal, the aim of them, is to alter cognitive appraisals regarding feelings of challenge and belonging. Just to walk through an example, before, or let's say in control conditions, a student who's struggling with adversity might think, this is difficult because people like me don't belong here. It's based on my intrinsic characteristics and therefore cannot be improved. My ability to perform in this domain is fixed, and I may never belong. Okay, if I'm thinking in this way, that there's something about me, something essential about my identity, that's the reason for my struggle, that's a problem. Why should I bother trying if I can't get better? Okay. Instead, what we want to do is replace these cognitions, replace these appraisals with a view that it's difficult for me because this is common. This is college. This is hard. It's supposed to be hard. Physics is supposed to be hard. Organic chemistry is hard. This difficulty, however, is temporary and can be overcome with time. This is not a fixed thing. This is a malleable thing. My ability to perform can be improved with consistent effort, as can my sense of belonging. Pass it back to you, Eric.
Right. As you can see on the screen here, this is a quick diagram of our present theory of action. So students are not blank slates. They come into the classroom environment with a set of beliefs and attitudes. Specifically, they have beliefs about what the classroom environment is going to be in terms of belonging and in terms of norms. They have preconceptions about who is going to belong, how normal is it to reach out for help, how much help seeking is acceptable, that sort of thing. They also come in with attitudes regarding their particular discipline, whether that is engineering or whether that is physics or whether that is any other STEM or large lecture sort of course. This includes a variety of things, including the degree to which they have a growth mindset, that is, I can adapt, it's based upon effort, etc. I can become better, or ability mindsets, which is, my ability is fixed within certain amounts, it's not malleable, and so forth. They have certain amounts of identity associations with that particular domain? Do I think of myself as a geoscientist, for example? Value of that domain, how much does it mean to me? Interest in that domain, am I fascinated by it? Do I find myself thinking about it often? That sort of thing. And self-efficacy, so to what extent do I believe that I'm capable of performing the things expected of me in this domain, in this particular classroom context? Now, all of these things influence the students' engagement patterns in class, including cognitive and behavioral engagement, as well as social engagement. So this is how they take notes, the degree to which they find it easy to pay attention, or whether or not their mind wanders, their studying habits, whether they study with other people or alone, the amount to which they study, their interactions in project work, whether they raise their hand, whether they come to office hours, all of those things. Now, these patterns of class engagement, we predict, then will influence their performance. And it's this, like the engagement itself, that our intervention is designed to influence, to enhance the degree that they are help seeking, to enhance the degree that they ask a question that everybody wanted them to ask anyway, and that everybody else is confused about. Instead of just keeping it in and allowing them to feel shame that they don't understand it when everybody else presumably does, that sort of process. By altering the class engagement, we had hoped to enhance performance. This comes out in performance on specific assignments, coding assignments, for example, quizzes, exams, etc., as well as changes in their disciplinary attitudes. So shifting more towards a growth rather than an ability mindset, enhancing things like self-efficacy, identity with the field, increasing values and the interest that they have in that particular domain as well. So let's go ahead and talk about what this intervention actually looks like. The intervention is designed to be very, very short and very resource non-intensive, something that is cheap and easy to pick up and to be able to be scalable. It is faculty-led, so the faculty undergo a training session. It takes them 45 minutes of class time to complete. It begins by students discussing the current challenges that they're experiencing in small private groups. This is designed to get the students to open up and sort of confront these things and to begin the process of normalizing that struggle, being able to actually give voice to it instead of keeping it contained under that sort of cloud of shame and feelings of inferiority. They then conduct independent writing regarding these different challenges that they are experiencing. Then the students come together after that, and the class as a whole debriefs and sort of elaborates upon common themes from the class regarding the challenges that many people seem to be facing. And again, this tends to further normalize a lot of the struggles that many of the students thought were private, thought were unique to them or based upon their inherent characteristics, things of that sort. At that point, the faculty member is able to share these stories of former students from their particular class. These stories are usually ones of experiencing struggle, working to overcome it, and finally being able to overcome that struggle and experience resolution. So students discuss those stories and then perform future visioning of themselves. And this provides a sort of pathway towards psychological resolution for them as well. So the goal once more is to establish a classroom norm, that's the ecological part, that adversity in the course and in the transition to college is both normal and surmountable. That's the purpose of the intervention there. Now, as I mentioned previously, the intervention is not a silver bullet that works all the time and will solve every problem. It is something that needs to be adapted for each particular context in order to be maximally effective. So this is the process by which we do that adaptation. First, we go ahead and we use historical grades data and other data to identify courses that demonstrate significant demographic differences in performance over time, significant achievement gaps. We then go to these courses and recruit students who have been through them and conduct focus groups with these students to understand their experiences, understand what exactly it is about that particular course that leads them to have these feelings, that leads them to this sort of underperformance. We then use that information and the stories that they give us, which do include stories of things like experiencing challenge, overcoming it, and having resolution. And we use that to craft and adapt the intervention itself. Then at some point during the early semester, the faculty member will deliver the intervention and present those specialized stories that are contextualized for that particular course. Then at the end of the semester, we evaluate the effects that has had upon student outcomes, as well as their psychosocial mediators and moderators. So here's an example of what one of these stories might feel like. We're going to go through the basic physics for engineers. One student said, "I was one of just a handful of women in one of my intro physics study groups, and sometimes I felt a little embarrassed to ask questions. However, I quickly learned that other students usually had the same question I did, and we all benefited from working with each other and learning from each other. Sometimes I had difficulty with an idea that my classmates understood. Other times, they struggled with concepts that I understood. I remember there wasn't always an aha moment where everything clicked. It was usually much more gradual, with some concepts only becoming clear after lots of practice and discussion with my study group. I realized that everyone struggles sometimes, and the important thing is not to give up and help each other out." So again, that's just one particular example. Many of the others are quite similar. As we can see in this macroeconomics course, this has been contextualized to that course particularly. For example, here, what helped was getting to know the professor, studying well ahead of the exam, and making friends in the class. Now, those things were particularly highlighted by people in the focus groups from that particular course as being effective ways of dealing with challenge. In organic chemistry, for example, one thing that contextualized that particular experience was the frequency with which students failed the course and had to repeat it. So we included some of those elements in this story. For example, "I was extremely disappointed in myself and felt discouraged when I failed OChem the first time. But when I walked into that lecture room the next semester, I was surprised to see so many familiar faces." Again, normalizing struggle in that particular context. And this one from first year engineering. "If you don't know anything about coding, like me, you're probably feeling like you did something wrong." Again, because coding emerged as one of the areas of central challenge. So let's go ahead and talk about our methodology quite briefly. We conduct mixed methods inquiry. We tend to employ the intervention in STEM and large lecture courses that we divide into control and treatment sections. We use longitudinal pre-post survey designs and use a variety of traditional methods like ANOVA and regression discontinuity to investigate them. We follow this up with individual interviews with students and faculty, as well as with student focus groups that we use to develop stories, and tend to analyze these using narrative or interpretive phenomenological methods. I'm going to go ahead and let Kevin talk about a couple of trials that we've run in the past.
So I'm going to quickly talk about three experiments that we've run here at the University of Pittsburgh. We've also replicated these results at University of Minnesota, and I'm not going to be talking about our data from Purdue, which is brand new and hot off the presses. But let's advance, Eric. First, I want to tell you about our intervention in foundations of biology. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to save the animations and just point to the gray bars on the left panel. And what those are showing you are a gap in final course grades between white and non-white students. This replicated historical data. We went back and went through 3 years of data prior to this course. There was a consistent gap that emerged between white and non-white students in this course, which was eliminated in classrooms that received the ecological belonging intervention. However, there was no gender gap in biology. That's the right panel. And the intervention had no effect as a function of gender. So it seems to be addressing gaps where they exist, but not where they don't. Next slide, Eric. This is our intervention we ran in basic physics for engineering, which we adapted after the biology intervention. Again, looking at the gray bars, we see gaps between white and non-white students. Also, in this case, between women and men, and the intervention statistically eliminated those gaps. Students who were in classrooms that received the ecological belonging intervention did not show demographic-based disparities as they did in control groups. And then finally, this is our most recent study was in macroeconomics. And if we focus on the blue bars, we see a gap between stereotyped racial minority students and non-stereotyped racial minority students, which again was eliminated in the classrooms that received the ecological belonging intervention. We have more data, I have more slides. In the interest of time, I'll save that for the Q&A. But yeah, so very encouraging results and importantly, replicating across different contexts, different courses.
So very briefly, our current directions of research. We're currently working to develop sufficiently sensitive and robust survey instruments to detect everything that we want, and conducting further data analysis so we can build the empirical case for our stakeholders, as well as people in various institutions thinking about adopting the intervention. We are currently expanding curricular contexts outside of the pilot areas, analyzing subjective experiences, and looking to track long-term outcomes of the intervention, as well as dosing effects. So thank you so much for listening to our presentation. I'll go ahead and hand it back to Dr. Griffiths.
Thank you for sharing your fascinating work on the ecological approach to belonging interventions. It's kind of delightful to hear about all of the intersections between the research that you're drawing from and your approach to testing out the ways that we can support these kinds of mindsets and beliefs about oneself in classroom contexts. So I'm going to share a bit about some studies that we're conducting as part of an R&D center funded by IES, which we refer to as the Postsecondary Teaching with Technology Collaborative. This is a research and capacity building center that aims to study and improve how faculty teach and use technology to help students apply and strengthen self-directed learning skills, called SDL for short, to increase their success in online courses. Note that the focus here is on teaching and on using technology. We're really looking at instructional strategies that make use of the affordances of technology tools, specifically in online course environments, to provide more equitable and supportive instruction for students. We're also focused on a set of mindsets and skills that we collectively refer to as self-directed learning, and I'll say more about that in just a minute. A very important feature of the collaborative is that we are partnered with Achieving the Dream, which is an organization that builds capacity within a nationwide network of community colleges and 9 broad access colleges and universities. These partners play a really critical role in the collaborative's participatory approach to design and development. We're working closely with instructors from these colleges to co-design and test instructional strategies, and have recently formed a group of student fellows program to bring students to the design table as well, drawing from the same set of institutions. So what do we mean by self-directed learning skills? This graphic presents our conceptualization of self-directed learning processes. And as you can probably see, there are a lot of connections with some of the research that Kevin and Eric shared. We've drawn from self-regulated learning literatures, too many authors to cite here, self-determination theory, growth mindset, belonging. Again, many of the same researchers that were cited in the previous study. We posit that motivational processes are foundational. They include students' beliefs about their belonging in a class, beliefs about their self-efficacy, whether they embrace a growth mindset, the idea that they can improve their intelligence through effort, how much they personally value the course or assignments they need to do. These are emotions about learning. Metacognitive processes serve as the executive function. Metacognition translates the emotions of motivation into a plan of action. This plan involves setting goals, identifying needs, and selecting learning strategies. Later, as learning begins, it will involve monitoring progress and reflecting on performance and adapting the strategies. Applied learning processes put this plan into action. They involve follow-through, identifying new resources, obtaining help, and applying learning strategies, such as note-taking, self-quizzing, space practice to support learning, and problem-solving. Once the applied learning processes have been applied, there is a success experience, and this can feed back positively into motivational processes. Students' development and application of these processes, especially motivational ones, are influenced as an interplay between the individuals and multiple layers of context, including the classroom environment, relationships with instructors and peers, the department, and the institution. We hypothesized that students would benefit from support both early in a course and throughout the course around individual assignments. We're drawing from literature and practice to identify a set of instructional strategies that can support self-directed learning processes throughout a course. This starts with establishing a supportive environment and then involves various forms of follow-through to continue students' development and application of these skills. We are undertaking this as a development and innovation study, and we are undertaking this in several stages. We have a qualitative research strand that aims to shed light on institutional policies and practices. My colleague Sue is going to share some of the findings about this. We have a set of rapid cycle experiments to test and refine technology-enabled instructional strategies, and we're going to bring these strands together to develop and pilot an integrated instructional model that uses technology features to deliver self-directed learning instruction. And with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to my colleague, Crystal.
Hi, I'm Crystal, and I look forward to sharing how we have designed our rapid cycle evaluations and what we've learned so far. So the idea of these rapid cycle of evaluations is to test a fairly narrow defined strategy or interventions that address specific self-directed learning skills or mindsets in an iterative way such that the features we might want to test across terms vary or refined over time. And so the long-term vision is to identify a set of strategies that complement or reinforce each other and work towards an integrated course level model that supports self-directed skills across stages of a course in multiple ways. For our rapid cycle evaluation design, we have 4 main research questions that we are seeking to answer. And we have a variety of data sources, including student self-report of their self-directed skills, as well as some background information related to them, student and instructor interviews, as well as institutional administrative data and learning management system data to understand student use of online courseware. Our graphic here provides a high-level overview of our research design. And so initially, before instructors engage in the actual intervention, we meet with them prior to the term starting, and we engage in a co-design process where we present strategies that could be used in their course, and then we tailor the strategies in a way that would work for that instructor in their course. And then again, we engage them in a training around the implementation of the strategy. And then prior to this term starting, instructors select the course in which, or the course section in which an intervention or comparison section would then be assigned. And so for term 2, or the term in which they're actually doing the intervention, we ask faculty to implement the baseline survey to their treatment and comparison section to understand where students are starting with their self-directed skills. And then instructors in the treatment group would implement the strategy while the comparison instructor or section, so some instructors might have multiple sections in a given term, they would then implement the strategy in their course. And then for the comparison section, they would do business as usual. And then we ask both treatment and comparison faculty to administer the outcome measure, and that is like the repeat of the survey, to see how students' skills may have changed. And then finally, we ask the instructors to provide access to the data from their LMS that reflects how the strategies were implemented. So for example, is there a record that students actually watched the video or answered weekly prompts? And next, I'll provide an example of 2 of the strategies that we tested in the fall. So during the fall term, we deployed and tested 2 strategies in online STEM courses. And I'll talk about the video strategy first, followed by the periodic self-directed learning prompts strategy. So for our video strategy, we were grounded in prior literature and student interviews that we conducted prior to the fall in 2022 that Sue might touch on a little bit. But prior to doing the interventions, we had learned that students may attribute initial setbacks in an online course to their self, rather than reevaluating their approach to how they manage their learning. And so in the fall, we had instructors assign 2 videos to students during any point in the term that explains the science of learning and encourage students a sense of belonging as well as their time management. And so in our sense of belonging video, It provides a few relatable scenarios about students struggling to feel like they belong in an online STEM course, and then provides strategies to help build sense of belonging for each scenario. And then in our second video that was included in the fall about time management, provided descriptions of two challenges that online students often face, which is time management, as well as effective communication to seek help. And you see a third concept here around growth mindset. So recently this spring, we've included a third video related to growth mindset. And so a leading mindset and psychosocial interventionist, Greg Walton at Stanford, has noted that when interventions are combined, he and his colleagues have found larger impacts when sense of belonging interventions come before growth mindset interventions. And so this spring term, we're currently testing 3 videos versus the 2 videos that we did in the fall. In terms of how we structure the videos, all 3 have a similar format. So each video explains the concept, provides some real-life scenarios and strategies, as well as reflection questions related to the concept. And so these reflection questions can include self-rating related to strategies and one's own feelings, as well as self-reflection and prompts to plan how one might use the strategies that they learned from the videos into their actual online STEM course. And then we have our second strategy, which was our prompt strategies, we often refer it to as. But in this strategy, we review the literature as well, and it was common that a number of students need real-time adjustments to how they manage their learning to improve their course performance. And so we created brief prompts that enable students to actively self-reflect, activate their prior knowledge and planning skills, as well as their forethought. And I'll share an example of what that looks like. And so specifically, we had instructors assign students to respond to 3 questions each week. The first 2 questions that are displayed here are assigned weekly to encourage students to engage in planning and forethought. And then the last question that's presented is listed, helps students self-reflect on their understanding and activate their prior knowledge of concepts that they do or don't understand. And then that third question that's in that list is suggested to be included after a major assessment so that students can reflect on their performance and what resources they'll use to help better their understanding. And now that we've talked through the research design, I'll share more about our data collection activities and insights we've learned so far. In the fall, we partnered with 11 instructors across 2 of our collab institutions. So far, we have completed both pre and post student surveys and currently analyzing that data. And we also have interviewed a number of students and instructors across each institution to better understand implementation and refine our strategies for the current spring semester. Excuse me. We're also actively working with our partners to obtain administrative and LMS data. From insights from our student interviews, broadly, students positively perceive both the video and prompt strategies. Students noted they felt encouraged to find additional resources to support their learning, such as their college tutoring center, or finding affinity-based student-led study groups. And a number of students identified that the time management video and prompts respectively encouraged them to develop a weekly plan to assess their priorities and plan their time to work on assignments and how much time they actually needed to complete that work. While students reported changes in their help-seeking behaviors and planning skills, instructors were unsure as to whether they saw significant improvements in students' academic performance. However, we'd like to highlight that one instructor had shared that they observed that students were accessing more resources in our online text site and also needed less time to complete their assignments compared to their comparison section students. In terms of implementation, most of the instructors found it easy to embed the strategies in their course and think that the strategies should be introduced earlier in the semester. And some of this was just due to delays in IRB permission and therefore when we could actually start the interventions. And for our pre and post surveys, our survey had consisted of 8 scales that assess a number of constructs related to self-directed learning skills and mindsets. An analytic sample from the fall term consists of 190 students who finished both the pre and post surveys. Some of what we contributed to our attrition was just survey non-response, as well as the number of students that withdrew from the course. Oops. Our analysis plan will use a quasi-experimental design and establish a baseline equivalency via matching of SDL skills from the pre-survey. And additionally, we'll use a hierarchical linear models to account for clustering of students by section with fixed effects for each instructor and institution. Excuse me. Finally, our immediate next steps are to continue our Fall 22 data analysis and continue to collect LMS and admin data from that prior term. And we are currently co-developing additional interventions to test with instructors and with student input, and an interest in bolstering social collaboration. Lastly, we plan to conduct an additional RCE cycle in the fall and combine data across all the terms to increase our analytic sample size. Next, I'll pass it off to Sue.
Thank you, Crystal. So I'm going to share some early insights from a second strand of the post-secondary teaching with technologies work. We call it our study of institutional policies and practices, and this is largely qualitative research, which is intended to help us inform the continued development of our rapid cycle experiment interventions, and also is helping us look ahead to our long-term goal of developing that instructional model for use of technology to support student self-directed learning skills. We know that it is important to attend to the contextual institutional factors. Those will influence whether this model is adopted by faculty and whether it would be supported, scaled, and sustained in post-secondary institutions. And so the IPP study is intended to address some of those questions. So here are some of the research questions that the study is exploring. How do stakeholders in post-secondary institutions understand and perceive self-directed learning skills as we've defined them in our model? Are there institutional initiatives and programming already that are intended to help students build their SDL skills? And what are the opportunities and challenges to supporting SDL skills, particularly in online STEM courses? So over the past year, we have conducted interviews and focus groups and surveys with stakeholders at our 9 partner institutions. We have spoken with college administrators and staff members working in instructional technology and in the online learning divisions, as well as staff members who oversee faculty development and individuals working in student services. And we have interviewed faculty teaching in a range of STEM disciplines and also surveyed faculty who teach math and biology. And an important part of this work is to understand the student experience using technology and in online STEM courses, as well as their SDL strengths and areas of development. So we conducted interviews and a survey of students enrolled in online STEM courses. So a key finding from our interviews with faculty, administrators, and staff is that they do view the work of helping students strengthen and develop their SDL skills and mindsets as part of their institutional mission. These are broad access colleges and universities, and so this is a part of the work that they see themselves doing. But Rebecca shared our model of SDL skills, and that includes quite a few different constructs. And so most stakeholders we spoke with did not necessarily think of those constructs related in the way that we've related them in our model. For example, connecting motivational with metacognitive and applied learning strategies under a single umbrella. And most were not using the term SDL or self-directed learning skills. So that has informed the way that we've been working with our partner sites. Administrators and faculty and staff talked about various institutional initiatives that are intended to support students' motivation, their self-efficacy, their metacognitive processes, and their learning strategies. We did not find many systematic efforts to embed these skills in courses, like for example, at the departmental level or across all sections, but we were not surprised that individual faculty, through their own interests or creativity or passion for their work, are frequently attending to at least some of these skills and mindsets in their teaching and in their teaching of online courses. When we asked how institutions were supporting students' motivation and their metacognition and their learning strategies, stakeholders were most likely to point to programming and initiatives offered through student services. So many institutions require students to take a freshman orientation or a student success course that covers some topics that are relevant to our model, like note-taking and time management and goal setting. We found that directors overseeing tutoring and writing centers tended to be quite knowledgeable about metacognition and supporting students to plan and identify learning strategies, and that affinity programs for students from selected backgrounds, for example, success coaching for Black men or mentoring intended to diversify students entering STEM, those types of programs very frequently deal explicitly with sense of belonging and self-efficacy. So in summary, we're seeing quite a bit of effort at our partner sites to focus on these SDL skills and mindsets, but maybe not in a unified way. And most of that work is happening outside of the classroom and outside of academic departments. In faculty responses to our questions about whether and how they incorporate SDL skill development into their online courses, we identified a number of barriers and challenges that they articulate. Most faculty reported a need or desire for more professional development on this topic, particularly related to SDL skill support in online courses. Faculty were likely to report that they felt more comfortable supporting students' motivation, for example, in a face-to-face course, but were less certain about strategies to do that online or using technology. And some also raised concerns that, even explicitly mentioning things like sense of belonging or self-efficacy could open up discussions that they were not necessarily prepared to facilitate with their students. So faculty reported some lack of confidence in necessarily supporting all of these skills. The second challenge is relating to finding the time and the space in very packed curricula to address these topics. And faculty were uncertain that just adding a superfluous activity or assignment that hasn't been tested would potentially be wasteful of students' time, and students already have limited time and bandwidth to engage in their courses. So that was certainly a concern. And although it wasn't a dominant perspective, we did encounter some faculty who felt that these topics were well addressed in other places at the institution, and therefore they were not particularly motivated to try to incorporate that in their own courses. At the same time, to identifying these challenges, we also discovered a number of opportunities, particularly given our current moment in time. So coming out of the pandemic, there have been new institutional resources and infrastructure that have been developed to support online learning and to support faculty use of technology. And so these include new policies for learning management system use, rubrics for online course quality, new, sometimes required workshops and institutes focused on online teaching. So we see these as promising infrastructure that could be leveraged to support faculty to learn about ways to embed self-directed learning development into their online teaching. And finally, we're quite early in our analysis of our student data, but I did want to share 3 selected insights that are certainly informing our thinking as we continue to formulate the interventions for the rapid cycle experiments, and certainly will be helpful as we look ahead to developing our instructional model. We found that students, some students were quite intentional in managing their time, planning their learning, and staying focused and organized. And those students talked about using commercial applications on their personal devices. So apps that they found and downloaded themselves. They're tapping into a significant market of productivity apps and tools, and that it was less common for students to talk about strategies that were part of their course or recommended by a professor, that largely students are finding their own way in kind of managing their learning with technology. It was also common for students to report a reluctance or a hesitance to seek help in an online environment, and our faculty interviews certainly corroborate this. So reasons for this include perceptions that faculty are unapproachable, or that the questions that the student is asking might reveal their underpreparedness. And time management is implicated here because if students are completing assignments at the last minute, there may not be time for them to ask the questions that would support their learning and performance. So we certainly want to continue to think about ways to support student help seeking. And then finally, we find that students are likely to report being isolated from their peers in their online courses. And we suspect this may have implications for sense of belonging, as well as help seeking. So this came through really quite clearly in interviews. But we also report here just some data points from our survey that show that most students are not reporting connections with their classmates, and only about half of students report having someone knowledgeable they can consult if they need help. So we think that these will be important as we continue to dig into our data from students. These will be important for the continued development work that we will be doing in our center over the next few years. So now we will transition to Q&A.
We should get started since we've only got 10 minutes. Thank you all for joining us. I think you all know my colleagues, Eric, Susan, Crystal, and Binning from, sorry, Kevin, your name is reversed in your box, from if you've just watched our presentation. So we are very happy to entertain any questions. I know it's getting late here on the East Coast, but if people still feel up to turning on their videos, we would love to make this a sort of as much like a in-person conversation as possible. And so just to get us started, I'm going to ask if my fellow panelists would like to provide any updates on your research, since we recorded the presentation that you just saw back in March, and the world has continued to move forward since then. And so I wanted to ask if anything, what interesting developments have happened on your projects over the past couple of months that you'd like to share. And while you're doing that, I encourage anyone in the audience who would like to pose a question to either put it in the chat or the Q&A. After all of this time, I still don't quite understand what the difference is, but please do chime in with any questions.
Thanks, Rebecca. So I'll just lead off, but and Eric, I'd love to hear from you as well. So Eric and I are on the same team. We're at University of Pittsburgh and part of the You Belong collaborative that you guys were just hearing about. So our work is we do our interventions at the beginning of the semester, and then we wait for data to come in. We collect surveys a couple times over the term, and then we do a data pull from the data warehouse at the end of the term. So we don't have a lot of updates other than to say we are continuing to analyze data and successfully launched a new version of our intervention in General Chemistry 2 in the spring. And I think we hit just about all the classrooms. So that was we were successful with that. What else? What am I forgetting, Eric?
Oh, well, we're going to be launching in genetics. We're going to be revisiting the foundations of biology and expanding our programs there. We're looking forward to launching something in, what is it? It's going to be mathematics of some sort. I think we're going to be doing Calculus 1 as well in the coming year. So we should be getting some good data there. I work largely with the quantitative sections, and something that we've sort of discovered is that it's very, very difficult to adequately measure higher education engagement. It's a real bear and doesn't quite look the same as it does in the K-12 system, which you're all familiar. We've been using the ABC model until now, the affective, behavioral, and cognitive model, and found that it just absolutely is not appropriate for looking at engagement in higher education science. We need a much different model. So we've been working hard in analyzing the data that we've recently gotten to develop a much better, more accurate measurement of that particular set of behaviors, cognitions, etc. That's a lot more place-based. So you can talk to me about that later if you wish. But those are the updates from You Belong.
That's interesting. I'll share that I think since we delivered the presentation, we have to continue to do analysis of the student survey that we conducted to measure various self-directed learning constructs. And this was drawing existing scales from other validated surveys. And some things that were surprising were just the lack of variation that we saw across different student groups. And I think we're interested to see, once we get into analyzing the pre and post, analyzing the pre and post surveys for our rapid cycle experiments, whether we see growth. We anticipate we might actually see some students rating their self-directed learning skills less positively once they've become more familiar with what they are. We've seen that in some other surveys. So I think the challenges with self-report questionnaires and these measurement instruments in post-secondary is something we are familiar with as well.
The bit of a bear, isn't it?
Yes. Crystal, anything else you would like to highlight of?
No, I think we're in a similar position. Like, we just have like a wealth of data that has come in from like our recent like spring post survey data collection and like post interviews. And so I think our team is in a place where we're just trying to kind of make sense of like how we're gonna, pose some of these questions related to fall and spring. We also have like some LMS data that we're playing around with and trying to think of, what does it look like to look at what I kind of think of as like micro behaviors in terms of like how might the interventions encourage students to do things in the LMS that might have, maybe assisted with how they're studying and understanding course material.
So I see a couple questions in the chat. One, I don't think this is off topic, is whether belonging is being studied in K-12 and whether interventions have similarly remarkable effects in K-12 as they do in post-secondary. And that's for Eric and Kevin.
Well, I think that's specifically for Kevin. I don't know much about the K-12 context.
I just typed a quick reply, and yes, we are. We haven't published anything on this yet, but we are. We've adapted this approach for pre-college STEM programs as part of an NSF Includes grant, working with Jen Ariti here at the University of Pittsburgh. But Jeff Borman, who I mentioned in the post there, he has done belonging interventions with, I believe, high school students, maybe middle school. Don't quote me on that, but certainly before college. So yes, that there is some work on that front, but it's not. I do want to just caution, it's not like a one size fits all. It's not like you can just take the college one and do it in high school. You have to do your background and qualitative legwork to sort of adapt and to make the intervention appropriate for that age group.
And I'll just pose this because it's sort of the flip side, is whether there's been testing of belonging interventions in adult education contexts. That was another question that came in.
Yeah, so the closest we've gotten to adult education context is graduate students. So we've just kind of scratching the surface of this. But we, if you watch well, I think most of us on this call were graduate students, if not currently, we were at one point. And if you're anything like me, the doubts and the uncertainty were quite salient in my doctoral program for me, especially when I was a first-year PhD student. So we are thinking about that direction. There is some work. Shannon Brady has a great paper with Greg Walton that looked at long-term effects of a social belonging intervention into the workforce. This was I think 8 years after an initial intervention. So not necessarily in the adult space, but seeing long-term effects of what they did in college continue to affect students into adulthood. And yeah, I think there's great sort of a lot of room to expand this approach into older adults as well. Even in business settings, I could see this being used as well. I mean, professors, right? We deal with a lot of this as well, as new assistant professors.
So I'm the person who asked that question, and I think the reason why I ask it is also an invitation to see if anybody might be interested in pursuing that. I'm particularly thinking about the adult basic and adult secondary education context of folks who are trying to get high school equivalency. It's a very specific, very large, very diverse group of learners. And And one might argue that the issues around belonging and self-efficacy are particularly challenging for the learners. And I know that Meredith Larson is in this group today, and she's the program officer for a lot of the work that IES is running around adult education. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think you're definitely onto something, and would be a great group to do that work out with. Definitely shoot me an email if you're interested in collaborating. I love to think about new contexts where this, and different student groups for whom this approach might be beneficial. Let me just get to Thomas Brock's question. Focus on students at 4-year. So we do want to do some community college work. What our ultimate goal is with this work is to go beyond PWI. And we're not just at 4-year institutions, we're at PWI institutions and predominantly large publics. So we're covering a lot of students and a lot of ground by approaching these universities, but it's not necessarily the group that maybe needs this work the most. So we actually, Meredith, since we're talking about Meredith, she really encouraged us to think about community college as a potential expansion of this work. And we're going to be doing some work, laying some initial groundwork as part of this grant by talking to some folks in community college space. If you are one of those folks and you're interested in this, please reach out to me. It is definitely something we're thinking about, and I would love to just even talk for an hour about whether this approach could work and how it could be adapted or not.
Crystal, it looks like you've sort of responded to this question, but I just wanted to see if there's any other reflections you'd like to share about sort of how the co-design process with faculty has worked and what we've observed about the implementations of those strategies with faculty who were not involved in the development process.
Yeah, I think that the co-design process is we came with a prospectus or like a description of the strategy in terms of our suggestions of implementation, how you might set up the design, getting some feedback on the feasibility of some of the suggestions that we had. And so by the time we had, 2 to 3 co-design sessions with faculty that were, volunteered to engage, it was an optional thing. We then could present those materials to the training. And I think this is more anecdotally, but we might have to see in the data, but, the faculty that were more engaged in the design process were a little bit more intentional in terms of how they structured the strategy. So some might have made the strategy an extra credit or like an optional activity, whereas others kind of felt a little bit more importance in terms of how they embedded it. And so it was sometimes more of a required task that students had to do. And was just as much a part of their course grade as other activities. So yeah, I think faculty support has definitely been really, really key to how we get these strategies off the ground, and also how likely faculty are to endorse certain strategies over others. Like many prefer the videos because it's a lighter touch in terms of what they need to do in terms of implementing versus the prompts, for example.
I know we are past time, so if those of you again on the East Coast, you want to move on with your evenings, feel free to drop out. I'll just respond to Vincent's question about the SDL framework. I guess what I would say is that there are a lot of terms that people use that to refer to some combination of the constructs that we include in our self-directed learning framework, and we opted not to go with terms like self-regulated learning, which we heard was not received well by some practitioners and others that we spoke with. We felt non-cognitive skills didn't really do a very adequate job of describing the things that we think are important. I mean, what we're really trying to focus on are a set of emotional and strategic skills that students use to manage their learning processes that sort of underlie the academic components of the learning, and to think about how these sort of reinforce and support each other. So we chose the term self-directed learning, which has been in use for decades. It's often used in adult learning more than in post-secondary. But I will say that we're not completely satisfied with that either, because we feel like it places too much emphasis on students managing their own learning, that it suggests that students are supposed to have bear complete responsibility especially for their motivational states. And part of what we are trying to convey with the work of the Postsecondary Collaborative is that faculty play a really important role in creating the conditions and supporting the development of these skills. And so this is not entirely up to the students. We don't mean to suggest that students should go off and teach themselves, which is what many students feel like they're doing in online courses. But for the time being, we feel like it works as well as any other term that we could come up with to describe the set of mindsets, emotions, and skills that we think are really important. But no, you're not behind the times. I think it's a noisy space.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate your interest, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and rest of your conference.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
everyone.
you, everybody.
Look forward to connecting with a few of you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming.